Hey, Mikey. Your mom was telling me you got into quite the argument with some progressive weirdo today. Well, son, there comes a time in our lives where we find ourselves in relationships that are more harmful than they are beneficial. It could be with a best friend or a girlfriend or even half the United States of America. When it becomes more noticeable, you have to think to yourself, why am I still putting up with this? The discussion today, son, is regarding our country, the United States. As you've probably noticed, the debate between the left-wing progressives and the right-wing traditionalists has completely fallen apart. Instead of debating ideas to reach a common goal, it's become one of finding hypocrisy and personal character flaws on the other side. Unfortunately, I'm unable to say that things will get better. I can't say that we can just mend our differences and find what we have in common and reach the goal of the American dream together. That time's come and gone, and there's no going back. We can't even agree on what the American dream is anymore. But of course, it wasn't always this way. Before we get too deep into this, I got a quick political science / history lesson to better explain. This here is a political triangle. On each corner of the triangle are the three main schools of political ideology. Liberalism is at the top in blue, traditionalism is on the right in green, and progress is on the left in red. All the philosophies fit somewhere in between these three, and we can go deeper into this triangle on another talk if you'd like. It's actually pretty interesting stuff, but for now, we'll keep it fairly brief. Alright, so let's start with liberalism. And let me clear up first that the mainstream use of the word liberalism has been greatly misused in our modern times. It's often confused with progress. Liberalism is an idea that came from the Enlightenment. It is now often called classical liberalism, meaning that all men are created equal. It supports a system that represents the people and liberty, the individual over the collective, the social contract, and so on. Some notable liberals would be like John Locke, Adam Smith, Thomas Jefferson, and the Founding Fathers. And then for traditionalists, of course we know what that is, we talk about it all the time. But for a quick refresher, it's been around since the dawn of time. Supports a system based on natural law, a well-built hierarchy, protection of people's traditions and customs, and a strong religious faith. Some well-known traditionalists would be like St. Augustine, Franz Joseph of Austria, Philippe Pétain, and one of my personal favorites, Julius Evola. And then we have the fan favorite to talk about, that is of progress. Of course, we can do another quick refresher on this one too. It's an idea that not only are all men and women created equal, but must at all times remain equal, forever, no matter what, and at any cost. That the world should be measured only in material progress, and that anything traditional is outdated, and that we must correct human behavior in what we see as correct. Again, at any cost. Some notable progressives would be like Bernie Sanders, Fidel Castro, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, Karl Marx, and the old snake in the garden himself, Lucifer. Does that make sense, Mikey? Good. So now that we have the general idea of the political spectrum, let's talk about the Overton window. What that means is what is normally acceptable ideas to talk about in the current time and with society as a whole. So things like communism and fascism and anarchy tend to be outside the Overton window in most groups. The Overton window itself tends to move throughout the triangle depending on culture and the era when the conversation took place. In the United States, for the most part, the Overton window has remained close to the top in the liberal section, stretching a bit to the left and a little bit farther to the right. And prior to the 2010s, this has always been the case. with one side moving a little bit more authoritarian and the other side balancing out being more pro-freedom and switching back and forth every decade or so. An example of this would be where the right-sided liberals became more authoritarian under the Bush Jr. presidency after 9/11, and the left-sided liberals became more freedom-oriented, being anti-war, pro-free speech, and pro-privacy. Then the scripts flipped after Obama was elected and gave rise to the Tea Party. That made the center-right liberals move more libertarian, and the center-left liberals more authoritarian. In the end, though, the debate was still able to happen, as both sides would come from a liberal perspective, wanting more liberty, more freedom, and more capital. The big difference was just how we got there. Things changed, though, around 2014-2015. The center-left liberals started to move away from the center-left liberalism and more towards progress. And as a natural reaction, the center-right started to move away from center-right liberalism and started to move more towards traditionalism. The left started to demand equality, and the right demanded order. The left wanted to rewrite society, and the right wanted to go back to a simpler time. The debate was no longer possible. Not only did we have different processes on how to solve the cultural problems, but now we didn't agree on what the cultural problems are that need to be fixed. In case another situation arises where you're in a debate with a progressive, I do have 3 ways for you on how to handle it. The most important thing is to know that they're immune to most insults. Call them lazy, degenerate, soy boys. It all falls off them like rain on an umbrella. But tell them that it's best that we no longer coexist. You'll be astonished at how they recoil, how injured they are. They know they've been abandoned. This leaves them vulnerable. The greatest fear of the progressive is to be abandoned. Think about this. The left bases its virtue off the universal idea that all humanity needs to help each other. When a group leaves, it makes them more vulnerable to the dangers of nature. They know they'll struggle without us. They need us to make their system work. The other issue is that they're no longer able to keep tabs on us. The fear of the unknown puts their anxiety levels through the roof. It is in the best interest of the progressive for everyone to stick together. To them, it's a matter of survival. This is why they push equality and fairness and inclusivity and tolerance so hard. It's so no one gets left out of the universal group, could leave them alone in the wild. This is their main weakness, and it must be understood for tradition to survive. The first way to debate is to find a topic where there is no room for compromise. For example, I debated a leftist a couple weeks back who was trying his hardest to educate me on why it's best we stick together. So I gave him 3 issues that if he could solve, I would concede and say I was wrong. The 3 issues I gave was the first one. I told him we're concerned that our grandchildren will be forced to conform with the newest wave of decadence, like we do today compared to 100 years ago. How can you fix that for us? Number 2, are you willing to outlaw transhumanism to pacify us? The idea that humans should be able to alter their own biology and children's biology to the way they see best fit. This includes altering DNA of the unborn babies to pick their eye and hair color, the gender they'll be born, and things like that. Number 3, what about the preservation of all races and ethnicities? I informed them that a lot of us on the right, we have concerns about the extinction of whites, Native Americans, and East Asian populations. Groups that populations are in rapid decline, and once gone, would never come back. He was unable to solve any of my questions. You see, through the eyes of the left, we on the right are misguided. We've been tricked by the big corporations and the Fox News into thinking Mexicans are stealing our jobs, and that high taxes are the reasons I'm not paid more. It's all material issues with them. They believe that once we understand that we are entitled to a fair share of the universal material wealth, they'll acknowledge our fault, see the light, and go sing John Lennon's Imagine in the streets. The second way is to talk about subjects that are not in the current conversation. Just get a brief idea of what the big news is at the moment, then follow politics as little as possible. I'm not saying don't be involved, make sure to vote for the most traditional candidates around election time, but outside of that, it's worth more to focus on your own life and not let the news consume too much of your time and energy. As long as you avoid the big subject of the day, you should be fine to really talk about whatever you really want. The left is driven very hard by emotion, so avoid any triggering conversations or terms. Like if a black guy was killed by a police officer lately, I would avoid talking about race. If you avoid the minds in the field of the conversations with a cosmopolitan, it gives you a lot of freedom, because if the news isn't talking about it, then most likely they've not put much thought into it. The last thing is to acknowledge there is no common ground and just give them a hard time. Make sure they know they're wasting their time trying to reach out to us. This was a very common tactic used around 2016 and 2017. Around that time, some big Hollywood celebrity created an art piece as protest to the election of Donald Trump, saying that he will not divide us. Many young right-wingers used it as an opportunity to troll the progressives. Looking back, it was pretty funny. The YouTube channel Internet Historian made a great series on it, and you should give it a watch after this talk. It's a good laugh. It's time we go our own way as a people. As we've seen throughout all of history, if we continue to live with these cosmopolitans, they will negatively influence our culture with ideas that are now seen as taboo, and within a generation will become normalized, as they always do. The best thing to do is to find like-minded people, find other traditions that have not been consumed by modern culture, find communities where our ideas are accepted, like places of worship or right-wing internet forums or image boards. When you get your first home, look for something that's more rural instead of urban. Listen to music that talks about our values in a positive way instead of modern pop music that only speaks of degenerate behavior. Avoid the indoctrination that comes from Hollywood. Find more decentralized entertainment like YouTube or BitChute. Especially shows that involve little frog people named Mikey. You should definitely subscribe to those kind of channels and click like on all the videos. I'd highly recommend that. Marry a woman that is accepting of traditional gender roles. And if you can homeschool your children so they can learn the skills that are actually useful to being an adult. Most of all, stay away from the serpent in the garden. Avoid the temptations of the modern world. Have faith. And put your family above all else.